Story number 1. The Missing Hiker in the Great Smoky Mountains. I've lived in Tennessee most of my life, and when you grow up around the Smoky Mountains, you learn to respect the wilderness. You learn the trails, the creeks, the sounds of the forest, the way the trees sway when the wind whispers through them, and how the mountain fog wraps itself around you like a lover with a secret to keep. But there's one thing the Smokies have taught me that still makes my skin crawl to this day. Some things, some people, just vanish, and when they do, they're never truly gone. Geraldine Largay's disappearance was one of the first stories I remember hearing about as a kid, a story that haunted the town for years. And as time went on, the story became more than just a local legend. It became a chilling reminder of the forest's dark grip. The kind of thing you hear when you're sitting around a campfire or walking the trails alone at night. Some things, like Geraldine, you don't find. Some things find you. It was the summer of 2013 when I first came across her name. Geraldine Largay was a hiker, a woman in her early 60s, a seasoned traveler, a soul who'd spent most of her life trekking through the Appalachian wilderness. She'd set out on a solo hike along the Appalachian Trail, planning to make her way north through the Smokies. She was well prepared. She knew the trail like the back of her hand. But then, she just vanished. She didn't make it to the next shelter. She didn't check in at the usual stop. Her husband, George, reported her missing within hours. And that's when the search began. For days, rescue teams scoured the area, combing every inch of the forest for signs of her. They found nothing. No footprints, no gear, no hint that she had ever been there. Just a dense fog that seemed to have swallowed her whole. For months, people searched. Helicopters flew overhead, and dogs sniffed the ground. But it was as though the mountain had swallowed her, leaving no trace behind. The authorities assumed she'd gotten lost, wandered off the path, and died somewhere in the dense underbrush. But I knew, hell, everyone knew, there was something more to it. The Smokies don't give up their secrets so easily. Then, 2 years later, they found her, not in some forgotten ravine or some cliffside where she'd slipped and fallen, but in a small, nondescript spot no more than a mile off the main trail. She was lying there, curled up like she had been waiting for someone to come and get her. But no one had, not for 2 years. But it wasn't just the discovery of her body that shook people. It was what they found with her. A journal, a little leather-bound notebook that had survived the elements and the time, like a message left behind, waiting for someone to decode it. And the entries in that journal were enough to turn the stomachs of everyone who read them. I've been walking for days now, but I haven't seen another soul. It's so quiet, so lonely. I hear sounds sometimes, the sound of someone walking behind me, but when I turn around, there's no one there. Maybe it's just my imagination. I haven't seen any other hikers. No sign of anyone. But I'm starting to feel like I'm being followed. I remember reading that first entry, the one that made my heart skip. I had chills crawling up my spine. But it wasn't until the later entries that things took a darker turn. Last night, I heard them again. Footsteps, right behind me. I can feel their eyes on my back. But when I look, there's no one there. I don't think it's just in my head. They're watching me. I can't explain it. But I know I'm not alone out here. Then came the final entry, the one that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand straight up. They're closer now. I can hear them breathing. There's something wrong with the forest. It's not the same. There are people here, but they're not real. I don't know how much longer I can stay. I'm so tired. I don't know how to get out. I think they want me to stay. I think they want me to disappear. It was that last sentence, that they want me to disappear, that drove the final nail into the coffin of what had happened to her. She wasn't just lost. She wasn't just some unfortunate hiker who had gotten off course. No, there was something else in the woods with her. Something old. Something that had been there long before she ever stepped foot on the trail. Something that made the trees seem to whisper, made the rocks shift just out of sight, made the shadows seem alive. I know what you're thinking. You're thinking it's all just paranoia, just the mind playing tricks after days of isolation. of exhaustion, of hunger, and I wouldn't blame you for thinking that. But there's something about the Smokies, something about that part of the world, that makes me believe otherwise. When the searchers found her, they didn't just find her body and her journal. They found something else too. Her backpack had been torn open, as if someone had rifled through it. There were scraps of paper, torn and crumpled, scattered around her. But what caught their attention most of all was the lack of any sign of struggle. No broken branches, no signs of a fight. It was as though she had simply laid down and waited. But the worst part? No one had ever found those footsteps she had written about. No tracks, no trace of whoever or whatever had been following her. I've hiked in the Smokies a few times since then. I've walked the same trails, even taken the same route Geraldine did that day, trying to understand what happened. And every time I get close to the area where they found her, I feel it's something cold, something wrong. The air goes still, the kind of stillness that doesn't belong in the woods. And sometimes, just sometimes, I think I hear it, footsteps, behind me, or maybe it's the wind. But I can't shake the feeling that I'm being watched, followed. That's the thing about the Smokies, they're not just mountains. They're alive, in a way, and they don't forget the people who disappear into their depths. Maybe Geraldine's spirit is still there, walking the trails, hoping someone will finally hear her cries for help. Or maybe it's something else, something older, something that preys on the lost souls who wander too deep into the heart of the forest. It's been years since she disappeared, but I'm telling you now, the forest remembers, and it wants you to remember too. If you ever go hiking in the Smokies, don't follow the voices in the wind. Don't listen to the footsteps that follow you. And most importantly, never, never look back, because if you do, you might just find yourself in the same place Geraldine did, and you might never make it out. Story number 2. The Phantom Hiker of Mount Hood. The first time I heard the story of the Phantom Hiker was in the spring of 1984. I was a kid back then, maybe 15, sitting around the fire with a group of hikers at Timberline Lodge on Mount Hood. We'd been talking about the usual stuff, favorite trails, near-death experiences, that sort of thing, when an older man, with a face carved by time and mountain winds, dropped his voice and leaned in close. "You ever heard about the man in the red jacket?" he asked, eyes glinting like he was holding back something awful. We all nodded, half-heartedly, thinking it was one of those tall tales, the kind you tell after too much beer or maybe after hiking a little too high on the mountain. He wasn't smiling when he spoke again. "Let me tell you something," he said. "That mountain, she has a way of keeping people, not just the ones who fall, or the ones who vanish in the snow. There's one spirit, one man, that has been walking her ridges for over 30 years now. And he's still here. You can feel him watching." And then he told us the story of Barry. Barry Tanner was just another hiker in 1951. Just another adventurer who thought he knew Mount Hood like the back of his hand. Barry had climbed that mountain for years. He knew every crevasse, every twisted route, and every icy ridge. But that winter, things were different. There was something about the air, something about the snow that winter, thick, choking, relentless, the kind of snow that could pull you under and keep you buried forever. Barry had gone up alone, like he often did. No reason to think anything was wrong. And when he failed to return, a search party was formed. They scoured the mountain for days. By the third day, the snow had fallen so heavily that visibility was almost nothing. But that's when the story started. A fellow hiker, part of the search party, claimed to have seen him. Not Barry, not the living, but a figure, a shadow standing by a jagged cliff, watching them. This wasn't some strange hallucination. The hiker was sure of it. He saw a man in a red jacket, clearly outlined against the snow, standing perfectly still. But when the hiker approached, the figure disappeared, vanished. The others thought the hiker was seeing things, maybe hypothermia setting in, or the wind playing tricks on him. But then it happened again, and again. Other hikers reported seeing the same thing, Barry's ghost, standing on the mountain, wearing that red jacket. 3 days passed. They never found Barry's body. His disappearance remained a mystery, one of those cold cases you hear about and forget, until you're alone in a dark place and your thoughts start to wander. But the man in the red jacket didn't leave. I've been to Mount Hood a lot since that night by the fire, and I'll be honest, I thought it was all nonsense. I didn't believe in ghosts or spirits or anything like that. I'd seen what the mountain could do to people, the way the weather could turn, how it could swallow a person whole if you weren't careful. But the whole phantom hiker thing? It felt like the kind of thing that kept people entertained during long nights at the lodge. That was until last year. It was late October, a cold, biting evening. The wind was howling outside, and the snow had begun to fall in heavy, wet sheets. I was in the middle of a solo hike, aiming for the summit, thinking I could beat the storm. I'd been up there many times before, but something about that day was different. The air was thick, oppressive. It was a feeling that got under your skin, that made the hairs on the back of your neck stand on end. I was somewhere near the Timberline Trail, on the steep slopes above the lodge, when I saw it, a flash of red. At first, I thought it was just a reflection of my gear, my jacket, maybe, or a patch of bright snow reflecting the setting sun. But then I saw it again, a figure in the distance, standing against the backdrop of the mountain's jagged edge. I stopped, squinting through the swirling snow. The figure wasn't moving, just standing there, as though it had been waiting for me. I called out, thinking it was another hiker, but the figure didn't respond. It didn't even flinch, just stood there, stock still, like some strange mannequin frozen in time. I took a step forward, then another, instinctively feeling a pull toward it. My breath came faster as I closed the gap, the snow around me crunching beneath my boots. The air grew colder, like it was pulling in around me, making the very atmosphere feel thick and suffocating. And that's when I realized something. The figure wasn't right. The closer I got, the more I could see it wasn't human. It was wrong. The shape was too perfect, too still, too smooth in a way that didn't belong in nature. The red jacket, it was too vivid, almost glowing in the dark. My heart pounded in my chest, and the air seemed to grow heavier with every step. I stopped dead in my tracks when I saw the face. It wasn't Barry. Not exactly. The face was a blur, a shadow, like looking into the eyes of something that wasn't supposed to exist. Something old, something ancient, a face that looked like it had seen too many years, too many winters, too many ghosts. But it wasn't Barry's. It was someone else, something else. And then, as if it had been nothing more than a mirage, the figure simply vanished, gone, as though it had never been there in the first place. I don't know how long I stood there, staring at the spot where the figure had been. The cold was unbearable now, seeping into my bones, and my breath was shallow. Something had changed. Something had been unleashed. I turned, instinctively, and started heading back toward the lodge. Faster now, my heart pounding with every step. It wasn't until I reached the lodge that I noticed the silence. There were no more sounds of hikers coming up the mountain. No voices in the distance. No wind, just the steady, rhythmic thump of my own heart. I didn't go back to Mount Hood for a long time after that. But here's the thing, there's a coldness that sticks with you after an experience like that. A whisper in the back of your mind that grows louder over time. And over the years, I've come to realize something. That man in the red jacket, whoever he was, whatever he was, he's still out there, still walking the mountain, still waiting for the next hiker, the next fool to step too close to the edge. I don't know why Barry is still there. Maybe his spirit is trapped, caught in some kind of loop, forever reliving his final moments on that mountain. Or maybe it's something darker, something that isn't human at all. But I do know one thing for sure. If you ever find yourself on Mount Hood, and you see a man in a red jacket, standing still in the snow, don't approach him, don't call out, don't get too close, because once you do, you may never leave. And if you do leave, He might just follow you. Story number 3. Whispers in the Ural. The wind howled through the jagged peaks of the Ural Mountains, carrying with it whispers of secrets long buried beneath layers of snow and ice. I'm Ivan Petrov, a seasoned mountaineer drawn to the enigmatic allure of the Dyatlov Pass. The story of that ill-fated group from 1959 had haunted me for years, a chilling reminder of nature's indifferent cruelty and the thin veil that separates reality from the unknown. It was early December when my friends and I decided to embark on our expedition. We were a diverse group: Lena, the fearless leader with a knack for navigation; Sergei, the pragmatic engineer who could fix anything; Mikhail, the quiet philosopher with a love for solitude; and Tanya, the spirited geologist eager to uncover the secrets of the Earth. Together, we sought to unravel the mystery that had perplexed historians and adventurers alike. The journey began with optimism, the camaraderie of friends and the thrill of adventure propelling us forward. The first few days were uneventful, the landscape transforming from dense forests to barren, windswept tundra. As we approached the pass, the air grew colder, and the nights darker, the oppressive silence broken only by the distant call of an owl or the crunch of our footsteps on the frozen ground. On the fourth night, as we set up camp beneath a towering ridge, an uneasy feeling settled over us. Lena had noticed strange patterns in the snow, unusual formations that didn't align with any known geological phenomena. Sergei dismissed it as the work of the wind, but Tanya couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. That night, the storm hit. Fierce winds whipped through the mountains, turning night into day with blinding snow and relentless gusts. We huddled together in our tent, the temperature plummeting to unbearable lows. Mikhail tried to keep our spirits up with stories, but even his calm demeanor couldn't mask the growing tension among us. At around 3 a.m., I was jolted awake by a sound, a faint, rhythmic tapping echoing through the tent. My heart raced as I strained to listen, the noise growing louder, more insistent. "What the hell is that?" I whispered, nudging Sergei awake. He blinked groggily, rubbing his eyes. "Probably just the wind," he murmured, but his voice lacked conviction. I peered into the darkness outside, the howling wind making it nearly impossible to discern any shapes. Then, amidst the cacophony, I heard it again, a distinct whisper, calling my name. "Ivan, Ivan." Fear clawed at me as I realized it wasn't the wind. I shook Sergei, trying to pull him back to sleep, but his eyes were wide with fear. "Did you hear that?" I asked, my voice barely audible over the storm. He nodded slowly, and we both lay back down, clutching each other for warmth. The tapping continued, now accompanied by soft, sorrowful moans that seemed to emanate from the very mountains themselves. Lena stirred, her brow furrowed in distress. "We need to check it out," she said, her voice trembling. Reluctantly, we gathered our gear and stepped out into the storm, the biting cold seeping through our layers of clothing. The snow obscured our vision, but the persistent tapping guided us forward, deeper into the heart of the pass. The whispers grew louder, more urgent, as if pleading for something we couldn't understand. We reached the source of the noise near an abandoned campsite. Remnants of tents and gear scattered haphazardly across the snow. In the center stood a figure, a ghostly apparition clad in tattered clothing, his face obscured by shadows. He pointed towards the dense forest beyond, his silent plea echoing in our minds. Tanya, ever the skeptic, tried to rationalize it. "It's probably some animal or a hallucination from the cold," she said, but her voice wavered. Suddenly, the ground beneath us trembled, and the apparition began to fade, his form dissipating into the swirling snow. Panic set in as the wind intensified, the storm turning into a blinding whiteout. We stumbled back to our tent, the oppressive atmosphere pressing down on us, making it hard to breathe. Inside, the tent was a sanctuary, but the sense of being watched lingered. We huddled together, the storm raging outside, our minds racing with fear and confusion. Lena tried to maintain order, but the tension was palpable, each of us grappling with the reality of what we had witnessed. The next morning, the storm had subsided, leaving behind a serene, almost surreal landscape. Exhausted and frostbitten, we made our way back to base camp, the events of the night still fresh in our minds. But the true horror was yet to come. As we descended the pass, the snow grew deeper and the air thinner. Lena insisted on taking a shortcut through a narrow ravine, a path we had avoided on previous expeditions. Reluctantly, we followed her lead, the silence around us oppressive. Suddenly, Sergei screamed, his voice cut short as he stumbled into a hidden crevasse. We rushed to his side, but there was no sign of him, only the echo of his desperate cries fading into the distance. Panic surged through us as we frantically searched, but Sergei was nowhere to be found. Tanya's face was pale, her eyes wide with fear. "We need to call for help," she said, but our radios were dead, likely a result of the storm's interference. The realization that we were alone, stranded in the heart of the mountains, sent a wave of despair crashing over us. We pressed on, the path growing treacherous as night approached once more. The whispers returned, louder and more desperate, guiding us towards an unknown destination. Hours passed in a blur of fear and exhaustion, the lines between reality and nightmare blurring into a horrifying tapestry of uncertainty. As dawn broke, we stumbled upon a hidden valley, the sun casting a warm glow on the snow-covered peaks. Relief washed over us, but it was short-lived as we discovered the remains of another expedition, evidence of struggle, broken equipment, and the eerie absence of life. It was the same mystery that had first drawn us to the Dyatlov Pass, now a terrifying reality that we couldn't escape. We decided to set up camp, hoping that the sun would provide some respite from the darkness that had plagued us. But as night fell once more, the whispers returned, louder and more insistent than ever. The apparition we had seen earlier materialized before us, his eyes now filled with a sorrow that pierced our very souls. "You must remember," he intoned, his voice a haunting echo that reverberated through the valley. "Honor the spirit of the mountains. Respect the balance." Before we could respond, the ground beneath us shook violently, and the apparition began to fade, his form dissolving into the night. The temperature plummeted, and the oppressive atmosphere returned with a vengeance, the whispers turning into anguished cries that filled the air with a sense of impending doom. Desperate to escape, we packed our gear and raced back down the pass, the storm intensifying around us. The path became a blur of white, the wind howling in our ears as we pushed our bodies to the limit. The whispers followed us, a constant reminder of the forces we had failed to honor. As we reached the base camp, the storm finally subsided, leaving behind a haunting silence that echoed the trauma we had endured. Exhausted and broken, we made our way back to civilization, the memory of the Dyatlov Pass etched into our minds as a chilling reminder of the thin line between survival and surrender. In the weeks that followed, the disappearance of Sergei remained a mystery, a haunting echo of the fate that had befallen so many before us. Some dismissed it as a tragic accident, a consequence of the harsh mountain conditions. Others whispered of supernatural forces at play, spirits of the mountains seeking vengeance for forgotten traditions and disrespected boundaries. I often find myself staring at maps of the Ural Mountains, the Dyatlov Pass marked as a symbol of unsolved mysteries and unspoken fears. The whispers of that night still linger in my mind, a constant reminder of the darkness that lies hidden beneath the serene facade of nature. It taught me that some mysteries are better left untouched, that the spirits of the past hold the keys to secrets we may never understand. Sometimes, during the quiet moments of the night, I hear the faint echoes of those anguished cries, a soft whisper on the wind that sends a chill down my spine. I wonder if it's just my imagination, a trick of the mind fueled by fear and sleepless nights, or perhaps, just perhaps, It's the lingering presence of the lost souls of the Dyatlov Pass, a haunting reminder to honor the spirit of the mountains and respect the delicate balance between man and nature.